Can you imagine what your life would look like if you didn't have a home? For millions of Americans, this isn't something they need to imagine, because this is the reality they live in. Ever since the health crisis restrictions were put into place, triggering the widespread shutdown of U.S. businesses, unemployment rates have soared. In fact, America has seen an unemployment rate higher than at any time in the country's history, including the Great Depression. As a multitude of workers started to struggle with job loss, many of them simply became unable to afford rent or mortgage payments. Millions are still at the brink of eviction, while others already have lost their homes. Of course, the U.S. homelessness crisis is nothing new. It's been going on for decades. Natural disasters, personal crises, many other incidents can end up pushing people to the streets, but these things were actually improving over the past several years. Then the virus outbreak hit, and all those improvements were gone. At this point, as the number of people without a home rapidly rose across the country, it has been hard to keep track of the real rate of homelessness. Recent estimates suggest that there are at least 1.5 million homeless people in the U.S., and over the past 12 months, even with the CDC's moratorium, that number never ceased to grow. While the wealthy engage in fierce bidding wars, paying over $1 million above the asking price for a home, and they purchase entire neighborhoods for a quick profit, affordable housing has become impossible to find. Rents have been ticking up too. In April, they hit the highest level in over a decade, and all of that is contributing to force more and more impoverished Americans into the streets with each passing day. What we're seeing in 2021 is rapidly becoming a crisis of epic proportions. Believe it or not, this crisis is more severe in the wealthiest state of the nation. California's homeless problem has been out of control for decades, but things have significantly worsened after the health crisis began. Approximately 160,000 homeless people currently live in the state, but many believe that the official figure is way too low. In any case, California's numbers eclipse any other state, and throughout the past 18 months, the effects of the virus outbreak have been a fatal combination of medical crisis, human hopelessness, and bureaucratic red tape for the state's homeless population. Recent reports describe an almost apocalyptic scenario with tent-lined streets with belongings scattered everywhere, infected wounds with bugs living inside, a man who hasn't showered in over a decade, an 80-year-old woman who can't feed herself, people who ride the metro rail lines because the trains are a safer place to sleep. The state's chronic shelter and housing shortage are becoming not only a social services problem, but also a political issue. Unlike anywhere else in the entire country, California residents can see people suffering and see them starving on the streets each day. In many cities, the homeless population is grouped in tent cities, including in San Francisco, one of the wealthiest cities in the entire world. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, tent cities have seemingly popped up everywhere. Tent encampments are typical sites under freeways and in areas such as Skid Row, but the health crisis, shutdowns, and quarantines caused them to spread across the city. Encampments popped up in parking lots, neighborhood parks, and outside schools. In San Francisco alone, tent encampments grew by 70% and became more visible across the city, highlights the report. Even though California alone is known as an economic superpower, its high cost of living, lack of affordable housing, scattershot efforts with too many agencies, too much red tape, and the lack of a clear direction have all made tackling homelessness in the state even harder. The state is one of the most expensive to live in, a problem only intensified by a shortage of nearly 1.3 million affordable rental homes. And that's according to the California Housing Partnership. However, the homelessness crisis is growing all over the country, including on the East Coast. In New York City, many agencies have been alarmed by the increasing numbers of homeless individuals in Times Square. Last year, in an emergency move to ease crowding in shelters, homeless people were relocated to hotels in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen. While some of the newcomers have been largely inconspicuous, others who struggle with mental health illnesses and addiction have moved back to the streets. And now that restrictions are getting lifted and the city has started to welcome back tourists and office workers, suburban commuters and residents affirm that there is a noticeable difference from the New York they knew before the country locked down nearly a year ago. They have been concerned with how the increase in homelessness may affect businesses and will affect tourism. Some of their worries are linked to a dramatic rise in the rate of offenses and misconduct in the Times Square area. According to the local law enforcement department, Times Square and many of the hotels have seen a 183% spike in felony assaults and 173% spike in robberies so far this year compared to 2020. And the conflicts between the homeless, locals, and tourists have already cost some lives. But the problem is much bigger than most people realize. As you can probably imagine, the homelessness crisis has been growing in the middle of the country just as well. In the city of Dallas, an enormous increase in the number of people living in the streets have started to bother some residents who have been loudly complaining about the surge of homeless camps. Recently, authorities have decided to remove one of these camps after nearby residents complained it was putting their health and safety in jeopardy. Local reports described that the sprawling homeless encampment was covered by a canopy of trees and located behind houses along Tres Logos Lane in northeast Dallas. And while residents seem grateful the city has finally responded to their complaints, all of the people who called the camp home say they have no other place to go. With no steady jobs, no safety nets, with mental and physical health problems, and amid a health crisis and a devastating economic recession, these people have become invisible to the eyes of the state, and they have been left completely unassisted to figure things out on their own. For now, residents of that particular neighborhood are just relieved that all of those homeless individuals are no longer bothering them. One of the locals even told the press she's thrilled ever since the camp was dispersed. "I am so excited, I am so happy, I have chills," said resident Maria Sanchez. It's not just the homelessness that we're talking about, it's the other individuals doing illicit activities, sketchy activities, she stated. So, what would happen if Maria Sanchez suddenly lost her job? She couldn't pay her mortgage or rent and ended up being evicted and losing her home forever? Where would she go? What many Americans are failing to realize is that the reality of those who live in the streets right now is not so far away from those who live paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected event to push a person straight into poverty. We always have to keep in mind that homeless people are humans, and we can't lose sight of that because the truth is that the vast majority of Americans are just a few months away from being homeless themselves. With rich investors buying entire neighborhoods to transform into rental units so they can charge exceedingly high rent prices, and on the other hand, low-income workers effectively losing the opportunity to ever own a home due to this extremely competitive housing market, we're headed to a future where only those who can afford to pay expensive rents will have a roof over their heads. In case something happens and you lose your income, you might end up in the streets just as well. In about 2 weeks, the nationwide eviction moratorium will expire, and economists have been warning that millions more Americans could soon be forced out of their homes in what they call an eviction tsunami. Meanwhile, millions of landlords have already filed requests for eviction, and the only thing holding a mass eviction back is the flawed CDC's ban, which has pushed many small landlords to the brink of financial ruin while largely dismissing big landlords' lack of compliance with the order. At least 5.7 million Americans, which represents about 14% of all renters nationwide, had fallen behind on their rent in April. A study released by the National Equity Atlas exposed that tenants owed approximately $20 billion in rent, with low-income people among those worst affected. Now, by May, over 40% of the 7 million tenants behind on rent at that time worried that they could be evicted in the next 2 months, according to the U.S. Treasury. Well, it's safe to say that now the rate of tenants behind on rent payments is far greater. And if all of this is currently happening, how bad will things get when the U.S. economy starts to fall apart again? It seems that, although things are pretty bad today, they could soon get a whole lot worse. Now, can you imagine what that would look like? Can you imagine what it must feel like to lose everything you own and everything you built during your entire life? That's why we should pay very close attention to the homelessness crisis, because all of this could happen to virtually anyone. Experts are expecting the number of evictions to skyrocket when the ban lifts. John Pollock, the coordinator of the National Coalition for the Civil Right to Counsel, told CNBC last month, "We're going to see what we've been managing to stave off. This wave of evictions that's just going to crush some areas." In fact, CNBC has also reported that in 2020 alone, over 1,300 homeless people in Los Angeles County passed away while sleeping in the streets due to addiction, untreated illnesses, physical assault, extremely cold weather, and starvation. This crisis is leaving a dark trail all over the nation. And even though some may argue that the government stimulus money may be helping these people, the truth is that the vast majority of the trillions of dollars that have been borrowed and spent over the past year have been pumped into the financial system and never actually reached those who needed it the most. Our leaders have managed to make life much harder for these people, as inflation pressures have sent the price of everything up, and those at the very bottom of the economic food chain have been particularly hard hit by rising prices. At this stage, it doesn't matter what politicians in Washington do. The homelessness crisis in the United States just seems to keep escalating. Millions of American citizens will sleep on the streets tonight, and many more will soon be joining them. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video informative, please check out the latest book of the economic collapse writer Michael Snyder, entitled Lost Prophecies of the Future of America, now available on Amazon. In the meantime, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section down below and turn on the bell to keep tuned with our next videos.